I'm Rajesh,
And I'm Richard,
and this is Humanity.
being human in an age of artificial intelligence. This season, we're discussing how AI makes culture. In today's episode, we're talking about AI and the internet.
I think around the time the two of us got to MIT, I remember taking a class with Chomsky where most of the class was really trashing one non-symbolic approach after another. And I mean, which he continues to do so to this day, but I think it's fair to say MIT kind of lost that
Oh, yeah,
argument.
unquestionably. Now we know connectionism as deep learning or just
Yes,
AI.
as AI.
Neural networks. I mean,
Yeah,
that's everything now, as far as I can tell.
yeah, yeah. Oh,
And I think the
um,
reason is that it's just a lot more effective. And
yeah,
there really wasn't the computing power to put it to good use. 20,
way back when.
20, 25 years ago when you and I were arriving at MIT, it just couldn't operate, right? We couldn't have truly deep learning. It would be shallower networks.
Yeah, yeah. And I think that the major difference between then and now is the infiltration of the internet into all of our lives, right? So it's not just that there's better computing power, but also that we are all connected to each other, and there are the kind of things that that computing power can be trained on is also widely available.
The training sets are much larger than they were before.
And more representative, right? Almost all kinds of speech is available on the net, for better or worse.
Speed and texts. Right. So I think actually the computing power is a really critical. Without it, you don't have usable
Absolutely.
neural networks. You don't have deep learning without the better computing power that we ended up getting maybe 15-ish years ago approximately. But then the internet and the training sets just became, were so much larger, so much more accessible. We get big data, large data sets to apply this kind of deep learning to.
Yeah. And frankly, all that coming available is sort of the revolution of our times, right? If I were to think of what is the single biggest difference in human life between 1990, so the fall of the Soviet Union, and today, I think it is this technology that connects literally every human being on Earth.
The connectivity, right?
The internet is a new set of affordances in human culture. Things that kind of sense of connectivity is something that's afforded by this new technology. And perhaps the single most elementary piece of it is the link in HTML. There's no internet without the hyperlink, right? But there are new affordances that emerge when you have tons of hyperlinks.
Right. Or even before you get to the hyperlink, just the connectivity of the internet, having networked computers that's not just one or two or even 10 or 100 computers in a network, but potentially all
Millions,
of them,
billions.
or
Yeah.
many, not all of them, but probably most computational devices now are connected to the internet at some level, and that's just a
Yeah.
whole lot of connection. And
Yeah.
and then later we get to the internet browse and hyperlinking, hypertext, a whole
Yeah.
new affordance for reading that we've talked about
Yeah.
before. It's a different way to read when we have idea that you can immediately follow to a different idea. You can go off in 1,000 different directions through the course
Yeah.
of reading one text.
Just as a segue, a tiny bit of a segue, the fact that, I mean, our attention spans are so much smaller than they used to be is partly because we have internalized this affordance, right? Like we expect to jump mentally from one location to another just as we do on a screen or somewhere else.
Having
So,
a just a solid text or a solid chunk of reading one text for a half hour is probably unusual for
most
most
people,
people.
yeah, for better or worse, I don't know, but it is another sign that our minds co-evolve with the technology, but more so than the inner mechanisms of the technology with the interfaces that the technology affords.
Right, right. And then arriving sort of around the late 90s, then we start getting effective search, right? Google.
Hmm. Yeah.
And it's
Google really felt, I mean, it felt to me the minute I tried Google, I knew this was just better.
you can have thousands or millions or billions of computers connected to each other, but if you can't find things, if you can't find files or resources in that network, then it's really not as useful. And that the ability to search effectively through that network allows you to discover things.
Yeah. And which now, in retrospect, again, Google is 20 plus years old. Like that's what we do, right?
I remember when I was a child, there was a kind of an age, I don't know, maybe when I was 10 or something like that, that the kind of authority that you could refer to was your mother, right? If, well, my mom told me this was the case, and that kind of ended the argument, with my
Yeah.
peer. Partly because you didn't want to offend someone by saying, well, your mom's wrong, but now you just Google
Google.
stuff, right?
Yes.
That's the authority.
And and in fact, it's such an authority that there's even a parody. It's called "Let Me Google That for You,"
Right.
right? So, like, if you ask me a question, it seems like you should have just entered that into Google. I can do that for you and give you the answer.
Right, right.
So,
What do you think is
yeah,
after search? What do you think is the next big change and the next new affordance that came along with the internet?
yeah. I think two approximately at the same time. The first is the social internet, right, where people could suddenly create and create in small doses, right? So everybody could make a website in principle, but it was Facebook and other social media that made it possible for most people to express themselves.
Right.
So I think that that's a big shift,
It's kind of
right?
a
Which
shift
is
from being a passive consumer of things that are on the internet to everyone being a creator as well as a consumer.
right. Not sure if that's the best thing ever.
Sometimes you don't want to hear all those voices.
No, right? But nevertheless, there's in a very genuine sense, it was a democratization of creation for
Absolutely.
sure.
Yeah.
Right, and the other thing is, of course, the touch screen and the development of mobile computing. I
Hmm.
mean, those two went together, right? The phone is the ideal device for short updates, whether in text or especially for images and video.
And you've got it with you. So wherever you
Yeah,
are, you can write an update, you can take a picture. And I think the camera on the phone, I mean, that was really a huge piece of it, right? Some people blog or make podcasts or whatever, but really probably the biggest way that people express themselves is through images.
I still remember when cameras were a thing. Like now, I guess if you're a professional photographer, you might still have a camera with you, but pretty much each image-based documentation is the phone.
Right. It feels like over the past year or so, that we've started a new turning of the wheel in terms of a new affordance being, of
Yeah,
course, the generative AI and the
yeah,
chatbots.
yeah. And again, it's not like chatbots weren't there. And I remember customer service type of bots became a thing a few years ago, but it was ChatGPT that really transformed the perceived value of chat as an affordance on the internet.
Right, right. You can ask questions, you can query things, query the chatbot, and it gives you really useful information. So kind of shockingly useful at times.
It clearly hints to a future where those bots could be semi-autonomous agents doing things for you,
Right.
right? I mean, I can imagine in 3 to 5 years from now, or maybe day after tomorrow, I don't know, these things move so fast, just saying, "Hey, can you please summarize the literature on this topic and write a survey paper that I can read,"
Hmm. Hmm.
right?
That it's kind of doing that already, right? Um,
Right.
it might not be a paper that you want to publish, but it might be useful as kind of a quick and dirty thing. It might be better than a Wikipedia query, perhaps, right? Because it can be more tailored. It's based on the
Yeah.
question that you ask, and there's an interactivity to it. I think in terms of thinking about the affordance that it brings, one way to think about it is that it allows us to explain or to really query rather than simply search or discover. Right? It's a kind of a
Yeah.
more the person doing the asking plays a role in the content that's generated. It's not just finding something that's already been produced, but the prompt itself will yield potentially new insights.
Because you can query it further, you can actually play 20 questions with this machine, right? And I think that's a profoundly new thing because I feel like, again, going back to the mother as the final arbiter of truth, if it was a fact, yes, that can be replaced by Google. But if it was something where you're a curious kid and you want to know more, you would still probably prefer your mom to Google, right? Why is this better than that? But maybe ChatGPT will replace your mom even even for those kinds of questions.
Well, and it's interesting, the interface for ChatGPT is like talking to your mom or to someone else, right? It's the first
Hmm.
time that we have an interface that's really a kind of a social replication, right? It's
Yeah.
replicating a human to human interaction.
But which then suggests its authority if it did become accurate and didn't hallucinate answers. Like if they solve some of those problems, I think the affordance of kind of universal conversation would lend it authority that we have never given to any technology, I think, so
Mm-hmm.
far.
Mm-hmm. To me, I am often reminded of the TV show from the 90s, the Star Trek The Next Generation, where the characters are on a starship and they every so often they say, "Computer, what's
Yes.
what's the estimated time until our arrival at the next, whatever." You sort of speak
Yeah.
aloud a question to the computer and the computer speaks back to you in a human voice and it gives intelligent answers. And to me, this it seems like a presumably there's development on having interfaces where you just talk to the chatbot, not typing, but just talking, and then you hear the response back.
We know that depending on the kind of voice the machine has, it may be experienced as having less or more authority.
Hmm.
And I do. I mean, going back to our conversation a few weeks ago on religion, I do think that there's a biblical transformation happening, right? That there is an actual artifact, a connected artifact that might have perceived authority and be experienced by people as having that kind of almost sacred authority to it.
Hmm. Hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Sort of
So,
the chatbot as the word of God.
yeah.
That's a little disturbing
Yes,
when you put it
yes,
that
it
way.
is. Yeah.
Not sure I'm ready
Uh,
for that.
well, that's where things are evolving. And I think that, again, the chatbot as the word of God is more to do with the wordiness of it and not the back end technology that makes that happen.
The interface.
And
It's kind of
the
interesting to me
interface.
to think about that because, thinking biblically, a lot of these metaphors for God involve a human, the face of God or the word of
Yes.
God. These are all really they're human interfaces, right? Speech,
Yeah.
facial
Yes.
expression, and
Yes.
facial perception. And here with computing and with AI, we're moving in the direction of interfaces that are more social. They're more human, right?
Yeah.
Dialogue, speech, listening, looking at images, away from sort of text and command line and sort of machine centered interfaces.
Hmm. Yeah. And that's, of course, building on existing interfaces that already have transformed our lives through computing. The graphical user interface is the closest, right? Where at least you're manipulating things with your hands and not just typing on a keyboard.
Mm-hmm.
I think that there's some sense in which the sensorium, the human sensorium, is being slowly augmented by technology. And AI feels particularly valuable because it takes language and vision and turns them into manipulable things that you can command and or produce on the spot.
Yeah, yeah. Thinking about this recent announcement from Meta that they're going to be creating glasses or some kind of new interface, it makes me think of Google Glass and what a failure that was. But At the same time, I just can't imagine that our future doesn't hold some kind of interface like the Google Glass if it had worked better. Or I don't know whether that was simply too
Yeah,
early in terms of our social mores and the idea of
yeah.
having people carrying phones around. I know for myself, when there was a certain point, maybe 10 to 15 years ago, where it seemed like everyone had a phone with them. And if I was in public or like teaching a class, I remember the first time I was teaching a class and a student had a phone out recording things, I was just really freaked out. I just wasn't prepared for being recorded in an unexpected way. And I think we've been getting used to some of those things. And it might be that at some point down the road, we're okay with having everyone else wearing their glasses.
We might even go to the extent of almost the mental version of kissing, right? Where we're not just we're not documenting your life. I might actually, through something like a meta, whatever the future glasses are like, experience the world as you experience it, right? If I'm wearing a headset, I can see the world through Richard's eyes and not through my eyes. And I think that those are the kind of transpositions AI technology is going to enable. In this case, of course, it's not just AI technology. It would have been called metaverse technology
Mm-hmm.
like just a year ago, but now everything is AI. So,
Just from a
so
marketing standpoint, it sounds
exactly,
better.
yeah. But it feels like this cluster of interfaces is going to come together.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. It's interesting to think also as cognitive scientists and for me as a psychologist, why shouldn't artificial intelligence come with a new set of sensory interfaces? Our
Mhm.
natural intelligence can't be separated from our sensory organs and our the
Mhm.
affordances that we have perceptually and our motor affordances, the ability to act on the world with our hands and speech and
Yeah.
bodies. And of course, artificial intelligence is also, as it's created and developed, that involves new interfaces
Yeah.
to interact with it.
I think it's bound to happen. And I think it's instructive to think of AI as an evolution of interfaces and not just as an evolution of hardware or of software, right? That it's a new set of organs.
Hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. There's a new set of organs for, in a sense, for the AI, but maybe even more importantly, ways for
For
us to
us.
interact with it. Right, that's kind of what the
Yeah.
interface is. And is
Yeah.
it as we develop more intelligence with computing, artificial forms of intelligence, that interface becomes more important, more critical, and plays a larger role.
And this is where I can see almost a fork in the road, even in the AI imagination. What I mean is, like the Holy Grail, again, to use a religious image of AI, is this artificial general intelligence, right? Which is AI that can do everything that you and I can do and more. But it may be that actually, as AI develops new interfaces and new organs, the artificial general intelligence might really be the the augmented capacities that we will have with this AI. So it's not replicating what we already have, but actually taking us in directions that we don't have right now. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, just as text and the printed word allow us to create Newton's laws of motion, I mean, it's just impossible without it.
Yeah, it's certainly viewing it as a kind of tool. Then, in this case, it's a mental extension. It's going to allow
Yeah.
us. It's going to give us new mental, different cognitive affordances, social affordances. I think, thinking about culture, that's often viewed as a kind of mark of intelligence. It's collectively
Mhm.
viewed as a mark of
Yeah. Yeah.
civilization or some
Right.
kind of collective intelligence. And thinking about artificial intelligence, this theme that we've been focused on of culture making, I think, is really one way to measure the development of artificial intelligence. To what extent is artificial intelligence creating and affording cultural development?
Yeah. And I mean, if you say AI makes culture, that sounds, at least, and is experienced by me as essentially a positive thing, right? Like it'll help us create new things, which we will appreciate. As even collective intelligence has a bit of an ominous ring to it, and that here's Skynet that's going to control you. But if we see it as a new technology for culture making, that I think gives us a little bit more freedom in even imagining what this thing is going to be.
It strikes me as, in many ways, morally neutral.
Mm,
And I guess as a human, I think of culture and as being a positive thing on face value. But
mm,
of course, it also maybe is what's allowed us to come to completely dominate the planet that
yeah.
we're on, really even to the point of making it uninhabitably hot because of, you know, from that dominance. So I don't know. It's, to my view, the jury's out on whether this is a good thing or a bad thing, but I think it's definitely a thing that is, you know, the genie is out of the bottle, so to speak, and I don't think it's being put back in. And I think we are probably wise to understand the genie as well as we can.
Yeah, and shape it to ends that aren't about warming the earth so much that it'll melt, right? So I actually think that in fact the culture in AI making culture doesn't only have to be about humans. I mean, it
Mm-hmm.
could, I mean, it's the first technology that may help us connect ourselves not to just to one another as people, but also to beings of other species. So it could be that there's co-production of culture that is beyond the human.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So
Yeah. Well, that's a good note to end the episode on, I think.
yeah, well, AI makes culture, and we make AI, so we make culture. Nice talking to you, Richard.
Good talking to you, Rajesh.
You've been listening to Humanity, being human in the age of artificial intelligence. We'll be back next week with more discussions on how AI makes culture.